Welcome to the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University, 4 blocks from the White House. I'm Stephen Hess, and this is the 4th program in a series of conversations on the presidential transition that's modeled after my book, What Do We Do Now? A Workbook for the President-elect. I am joined once again by my colleague at GW, Marvin Kalb, who is the Edward R. Murrow Professor Emeritus at Harvard, former moderator of Meet the Press, and now the Welling Presidential Fellow here at Brookings. I'm also at Brookings. The Welling Presidential Fellow. Yes, at GW, and he also is the host of the Kalb report here. We're again very pleased that our conversation is being broadcast live by our friends at C-SPAN. Today, if any of us were reading the Washington Post this morning, this is the article that would have started, "The 111th Congress began yesterday with debates over how to ease the nation's worsening recession and to fight a pair of wars overseas, adding a sense of gravity and purpose to a day normally dedicated to symbolism and the swearing in of members. Veterans as well as newcomers to the House and Senate said the immensity of the problems the nation faces created an opportunity to move beyond the bitter partisanship battles of the last decades, or conversely, to descend into legislative gridlock that would further damage a body already suffering from historically low approval ratings." Senator Christopher Dodd, there's something transformational happening here. It's the kind of year historians will write about. Well, when historians write about this year, what will be at the core of the 111th Congress, but the relationship between the White House and the Congress and the congressional relations run there. And that is, of course, the subject of our conversation today. Representing the President of the United States to the Congress and the Congress to the President is a job that takes a special talent. Some would say it's an art form. The grand master of this art was the late Bryce Harlow, who served first in the White House under Dwight Eisenhower. It was Harlow who was the model for the section of my book on picking your presidential lobbyist. The heir to Bryce is William Timmons Sr., and when I asked him to recommend panelists for today's program, he gave me just 3 names. 3 former White House aides who form the gold standard in this field by which we will judge the eventual record of Barack Obama. All 3 accepted my invitation, and here's something quite remarkable. These 3 gentlemen have served every president of the United States since Richard Nixon, with one exception, Jimmy Carter. And if you read my book, you'll know that Jimmy Carter had the worst congressional relations of any modern president. In order that they were around, the first is my old colleague, Tom C. Korologos. His Excellency. I can call you Excellency because Tom has also been the U.S. Ambassador to Belgium. He rates that title. He was there at the White House under Nixon and Ford, and then was the Director of Congressional Relations for President Ronald Reagan during his transition. He is now the strategic advisor to D.L.A. Piper. And here's the remarkable thing that I didn't know about you, Tom, that changes my view of you entirely. Before this all started, you were a journalist. You were with the New York Herald Tribune, the Long Island Press, and the Salt Lake City Tribune, and the Associated Press. Well, all right, if that's to be. The next is Howard Pastor, And Howard is now the executive vice president of WPP Group, and he was the assistant to President Clinton and director of the White House Office of Legislative Affairs. I want to say one other thing about my friend Howard. He is also the co-chair of the Council on American Politics here at George Washington University. We welcome back a colleague of ours, Howard. And finally, Nicholas E. Calio, and he is the executive vice president, Global Government Affairs, for Citicorp. We had to explain all, or we'll never explain, all of those initials like DLA or WPP. You're just going to have to accept that they're very powerful here in Washington. However, Citicorp needs no introduction to us.
Citigroup.
Citigroup, you now are the Citigroup. Okay. And he was the assistant to the president for legislative affairs, first for George H.W. Bush, and then later between January 2001 and January 2003 for George W. Bush. This is quite a group, Marvin, that I'm turning over to you. And see what you have to ask them.
I'm as pressed as can be. We shall get started. Steve has already indicated in his lead-in about the historic nature of this particular moment in Washington and in the nation. The first African-American president is going to be sworn in shortly. The Congress came into business again yesterday, the 111th. And one has a sense, there's just a feel of electricity in the air. And I'm wondering if you were back in your job, or even thinking right now that you're the man who has to give guidance to the president-elect, what are the sorts of things that you would tell him right now about what he should be doing with the Congress? And why don't we start with Tom?
Well, the first thing I'd say to him, well done so far.
Well done because he's done what?
He's gone to the Hill. He went up and met with the Speaker and the Majority Leader yesterday. He has schmoozed the Congress. There's no end to the time that he has to budget for that operation at the beginning. He needs to go talk to the committee chairman, have them down. I remember during President Reagan's transition, we brought committee chairs down when he was staying across the street at Blair House to meet with the new president to discuss things. I tell you, he's off to a good start with these appointments and with the way he started up on the Hill.
Howard, what is your judgment here? And I noticed that the president-elect arrives in Washington on a Sunday night. First thing Monday morning, there he is with the House Majority Leader. And so he's sensitive to all of this, but he also invited the Republican leadership to come on in.
Well, he met first separately with the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader, and then he met with the Joint Leadership, which I think was carefully orchestrated. One of the things that I would say to him is that the Democrats on the Hill, including Speaker Pelosi and Leader Reid, the committee chairs, they're being asked to give up influence. When they stand against a Republican president, they're in charge of the Democratic position. They can do what they want. Now they have a new leader, a party leader, and they have to give up a measure of their independence and their authority to work with their leader.
Is that done grudgingly?
Well, I think it's done cautiously, I think is the answer. But I think Nick had probably encountered the same thing in 2001. Republicans took control of the Congress in 1995. They had 6 years in which they were juxtaposed to Bill Clinton, and they could do pretty much as they wanted. I mean, they would have to negotiate certain things. But all of a sudden, when President Bush arrived, well, darn it, they had to take their cues from the White House. And so I think I would say to the president-elect today, remember, these folks, not just the leadership, but the committee chairs, are being asked to give back something, to wait for you to propose a health bill, for you to propose an energy bill, for you to propose an economic stimulus bill. And we need to bring them into this process lest they feel excluded, because at the end of the day, we don't have a parliamentary system, and you can't count on them.
Nick, what is your sense of the way in which Obama has up to this point handled his congressional relationship?
I agree. I think he has done extraordinarily well. I mean, I think what you would want to tell him is what he's doing. Reach out early. I think it's critical. He's got a great opportunity. You define the relationship oftentimes right at the beginning. Mm-hmm. But you can't make it a one-off. So the meetings, the outreach can't be a one-off. You try to make them steady. And in the way he's done it early before he's president. President Bush, 41 and 43, both did that. It serves a great purpose because you do have to bring them in. And Howard's right, it's not a parliamentary system, and they can do things either before you or against you, and they can run against you at home or they can run with you. Right now, he's at, 70% approval rating or higher? The more friends he tries to make now, the better off he will be because he's making them at a time when he doesn't need to make them, essentially. So it means more, in a sense. And I think he's done very well to go see first his own party, because Howard's right. There will be tension there. There's always tension between a president and Congress. It's built into our constitutional system. And he's just as likely to have his first outbreak be with his own party for the reasons that Howard mentioned than he is with the Republicans. And so you want to do that outreach. I would also suggest to him that in addition to doing the leadership, he very quickly move on to do various groups, Republican moderates, what's left within our party of that group, freshmen, the sophomore class, kind of the leaders, and make friends with them because in a sense, on a very clinical basis, you want to have relationships with members, sometimes independent of their leadership. You've got to look at them as blocks, potential voting blocks for your issues.
But the thing that strikes me just after what you just said, this, make friends with, that takes time. I mean, it takes time to have lunch and dinner and how are the kids and all of that, and he doesn't have that kind of time. So how, in fact, does the new president, arriving with these 70% approval ratings and probably higher, really allocate time? What kind of advice do you give him? Do you see only committee chairmen? Do you see this freshman who's just come in who's really terrific and you've got to make a beeline for him or her? How do you arrange that?
Well, to pick up on what Nick said, you start with the various groups, the power centers on the Hill. Don't forget something. For the first time, I'm not sure what I'm about to say, probably in history, we have a president, a vice president, and a chief of staff are all Hill people. And 5, used to be 6 till Richardson dropped out, 5 of the 15 cabinet officers are hillbillies. So you take that crowd, and they're from the Congress. What happened with President-elect Obama is he didn't come from Arkansas or California or Texas. He had no cadre of people from those states that needed jobs or that he brought with him. We all know the Clinton people. We all know the Georgia people, the California people. He wasn't a governor. He was a senator for a few years. So he came in brand new. And he brought in all these Hill people to run his government. Ipso facto, that is going to make the congressional relations operation in the White House very difficult. Because Hill Congress people talk only to gods. They're not going to go talk they're going to go to the president. Well, maybe we shouldn't go to him. Okay, we'll go to the vice president. Or we'll go to Rahm Emanuel, who's also a Hill person. Or we'll go straight to the cabinet officer. He was my colleague on the committee. So that is going to be a big problem, allocating the time, going back to your question, on how he's going to balance all this. The issues are so heavy and so big on the economy, on the international scene. He's got to budget a great deal of time to those areas where these people are from on the Hill.
Well, this is my point. Howard, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say that while Tom's raising a legitimate question, the fact of the matter is that Phil Sciolaro, who is going to be in charge of congressional relations in the White House, he is in charge of the transition congressional relations and will be in charge in the White House, absolutely understands the consequence of having a senator become president, a senator become vice president, a caucus chair become chief of staff, and multiple Hill people in the cabinet. And this is something that's been talked through. They're sensitive to it. They've worked it out very well. It was very interesting when the economic briefing was done last week, led by Larry Summers and the other people that are going to be key economic policymakers in the new administration, that Phil Scialero was on the panel for the briefing. Okay? They took the head of congressional relations. It says that the White House, incoming White House, and Rahm Emanuel was there when I was there in the Clinton administration, so he knows how it works, are carefully protecting the Congressional Relations Office and sending a message out, you work with Phil. He is important. He's at the table. He's part of the essential decision-making of the White House. And this is something that was, I mean, I can say without violating confidence, was something that was thought through to make sure that that the office was properly respected and that Phil was imbued with enough authority to do his job well.
Well, you know, you are all sounding very complimentary, and it may well be fully justified, but at the same time, you have what the Vice President-elect has described as a mistake when you put out the word, for example, that Leon Panetta is going to be the new Director of Central Intelligence, but you don't tell the person who's going to run the committee. And that seems to me to be an obvious boner. So how do you explain that in light of this wonderful way in which everything is happening?
Stuff happens.
That happens. Stuff happens.
I think Howard's right. Inevitably, there are mistakes. It was a mistake to not give advance notice. There's a variety of reasons why it could have happened, and you never want that to happen. You know, I always say, you know, with members of Congress, you want to consult, 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 and being careful of a conversation that Howard and I had earlier. When I say consult, that doesn't mean they have the right to approve or disapprove of your choices. But you need to talk to them, you need to listen to them, you don't have to take the advice, but you need to consult. And even when you do, you will hear a criticism that you did not do it. So in this case, it was a mistake. If you look at all the things that are going on, the economic package being developed, the health package being developed, getting ready for the inauguration itself, there's a lot of things. I'm sure it just happened, not intentionally.
Well, one of the things that's interesting to me is how you set up your priorities. I mean, you've just indicated something. You've got on January 20th, you know there's going to be an inauguration. You know that there's a terrible crisis in the Middle East. The president-elect has already indicated that though there is only one president at a time, he felt the need yesterday to say something about the Middle East. Okay, and then he's coming in with a huge economic stimulus package, biggest thing he's going to present. But then on top of that, he's already indicated that he wants to make major progress on legislation for health care, the immigration problems and all. How in God's name is that to be organized?
Well, in the first place, they got to be careful and not overload the circuits. The
presidential circuit or the congressional?
The congressional circuits with policy decisions. Yes, we all know those problems exist. He's got to prioritize his policy. He's got to decide that we're going to do these first 2 or 3 things right now. Don't send up 10 or 15 like the Clinton people did when they first came in and Carter did when they first came in. So you've got to say, number one is the economy. Okay, we see if we can fix that for a while. Then we turn to the Middle East. Then we turn to something else, energy and what have you. If he sends up 10 or 15 Christmas tree ornament things that he wants done right now, he's going to suffer.
Well, I think he's got a very, first of all, he understands that you have to be careful. There is a debate that can be had as whether or not, if it is as what Steve read out of the paper, what Senator Dodd said, a transformational moment.
Right.
Is this an opportunity to do a lot? Does it look like 1965 or 1933,
right,
which are the 2 times in the last century when there were remarkable amount done quickly under new presidents? And there are some who believe because of the nature of the Obama victory, because of the dire economic circumstance, because of his current popularity, because of the increased Democratic majorities in both the House and the Senate, that it may be a moment when, in fact, you can get a good deal more done than what Tom fairly describes as a more normal course of business. That's one issue. And that debate goes on. I don't have a clearly held view on it, but I think it's a legitimate issue. The second point is that what the president-elect is doing is he's using the economic stimulus bill, and everybody agrees we need one, They can argue about the pieces, but there's not a soul in town who denies we need something. And he's doing some of his policy stuff through it. So we're going to see some changes in health policy through this bill. We're going to see changes in energy policy through this bill. We're going to see some changes on employment insurance law through this bill. So he's going to get, through the investments he's going to make through the stimulus bill, both to drive the economy, he's going to get a down payment on some of the policy changes he wants long term.
But you don't think that that will run afoul of what Tom was warning about?
Not done in a measured way in the first, let's say he's sworn in on the 20th. He will sign the bill before the end of February. And it will have pieces of all of this in it. I'm confident of that. And so he's getting started.
And the Republicans will come on board. They're not going to make an issue and block him at this point.
Well, the Republicans are suddenly major players. Mitch McConnell and the 41 or 42 or whatever it turns out to be become a checkpoint through which all of this has to funnel. They must be participants, because if they're not, you saw what happened with the auto bailout at the close of the last session. It didn't pass the Republican muster, so it didn't go. So they've got to rope the Republicans in some way, and there'll be some Democrats that'll go along with it as well. So all of these things have to go through a lot of more hoops than is beginning. And Howard, I'll bet you $10 it doesn't pass by the end of February.
And what do you think then?
You got it.
Do you think it's going to?
Steve, you hold the money?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, this is an interesting point, because it has to do with the speed with which you can actually move this forward. Nick, what would be your judgment?
My judgment would be that it can pass by the end of February. I think the imperative is such that it needs to, and people will start to get antsy, and the markets will start to get antsy if it takes too long. I think the Republicans are important. I think if I were any member of Congress, though, if you want to talk about transformational, and if you looked at what the president-elect talked about during his campaign, people are fed up with the Congress. They really are. And they don't want people blocking everything. They would like to see people working together to solve the problems of the country. And that's easy to say. It's very difficult to do. I look at the immediate aftermath of September 11th, and we had this great coming together in bipartisan fashion and clicked off 4 or 5 really important bills in the space of about 2 months. And as each day passed after the first week and a half, the rank and file members of both parties started to attack the White House and the leadership, because they thought that the Republicans thought that the White House and their leadership were giving too much to the Democrats. The Democrat rank and file thought that Daschle and Gephardt were giving too much away to the Republicans. And, you know, it's a difficult proposition. It's a big, diverse country, but there is the opportunity to make that transformation as well. In terms of how much you can do, just because you're doing the stimulus package doesn't mean you can't roll out and start work on your health care plan or your energy plan. I agree with Tom. I think 10 or 15 is too much. But you can take 3, 4, 5, 6 major issues. You know, we did that in 2001 in the space of, I think, 12 weeks separated out by, I think it was every second Monday. First it was the tax bill, then it was the education reform bill, then I think it was faith-based, and rolled them out like that. You have different committees, different people. It's difficult for the White House, but there are different people in the White House handling those.
The idea of this being a transformational moment is a very large idea, and it suggests to me anyway that you don't do things as usual. Yeah. That if this be in fact transformational, then maybe you go off the reservation and you begin to think about new ways of approaching a problem. Are there new ways of improving? I mean, you're here because you know about the Congress and the White House. And are there new ways that ought to be instituted to improve the relationship between the White House and the Hill, given the fact that this is transformational? What do you think, Howard? Or is it all the same? It doesn't matter.
You know, from 1789 forward, it's all about relationships and trust. And the method of communication may change, the issues may change, but the ultimate, the nature of the system, I think Nick alluded earlier to the way the Constitution set this thing up. You know, it's not an accident, and as I said earlier, it's not a parliamentary system. And so if you read Federalist Paper number 10, it talks about the Congress as a place where factions will come to resolve their issues. And if you substitute a special interest for factions, it would describe the world today as it exists. And the Congress is meant to be juxtaposed to the White House for the purpose of resolving those issues. And the House and the Senate have different missions. That's why you have two from one and populations in the other. And so nothing of that has changed. So is there anything new under the sun? I think that the language people use needs to be different than it was in the past. I go back to Nick's point about the disrepute in the Congress. You know, President Bush is ending his term with very, very low approval ratings. At the time of the election in November, the Congress had lower approval ratings than the president. And we ought to remember that. So they can't afford to somehow or other seem to thwart the president, who was elected with a huge majority, both electoral majority and popular vote. So I think the language that is exchanged becomes important, and how they do that. The last thing I'll say about change, there are these millions of people that are part of the Obama network out there, largest grassroots political campaign in American history. And they're all on their emails and their Twitters and their SMSs on their cell phones. And they're going to be communicated with, and the Congress is going to hear from them again and again and again. And it's going to be different. It's going to be different.
Meaning what, Tom, exactly?
That's what's new is the
How does that get translated in terms of the actual work that you do?
You can now, as Howard points out, you can now rely on a lot of grassroots support. You're not out there alone. You need all those Twitters and iPods or whatever they are coming in to grant you support. One area, Marvin, where they can improve the system and do better is in confirmations. He must have his team aboard to start deciding issues and setting policy. And this problem of the continuing bickering over who's going to get confirmed and not confirmed, and the 90 and 80-day checklists and what have you, that has gotten completely out of control. As if Steve can promote his book, I can promote my op-ed in the Washington Post 2 days ago, talking about how to get confirmed. They need to have a system of getting confirmations in place. If a guy is a scoundrel or a thief, fine. But they need to go through a better process. Case in point, you take a nominee for a cabinet post. He has to fill out a form for the White House, the Office of Government Ethics, the job in which he's going, the Senate committee, and sometimes 2 committees. All 5 and 6 and 7 of these forms are different. The question nuances are about the same, and they're close, but there are little twitches in it that they have to respond to. Get that process streamlined so we can get these people in place. It would be awful for the President of the United States to be in office for longer than a week without a Secretary of Defense and a Secretary of State.
Tom, I totally agree with you, and with all due respect, you could have said this not at a transformational moment, as we have right now. I think we all agree with that.
It's everywhere.
What I'm probing for, if it exists at all, is there somewhere in this particular historic moment that cries out to you as an expert in Hill-White House relationships that we ought to do something totally different? We ought to mix it up.
I don't think it's totally different. I think it gets back to what Howard said. It's relationships, and back to what I said about the president-elect doing what he said he was going to do. And that's where some tension may come with his own party and with his own constituents and some of those people on Blackberries and Twitters that Howard referenced, which is, no, we're going to do it the right way. We're going to try to have a collaborative process. We will have our fights, but we're going to try to bring everybody in because they represent constituents that have a right and a say-so to get things done. That in and of itself, I think, would be transformational. You know, there's always been arguments. I keep this ancient print in my office, which was the House floor, which I love because basically got people climbing over desks, you know, with canes and screaming at each other quite clearly. And that's what the House is about. It's what Howard said, it's factions coming together to resolve issues. That's important, but there is a way to manage it better than it has been managed. No president's ever done it exactly the right way. It's impossible to because of the diversity of the country and the difference in the prerogatives of the 2 branches of government. You know, they're there to check and balance each other. But I really do think if you're sincere in what you say about working with people, and when I said friends before, I don't mean, you know, arm around you all the time, buddies. I'm talking about talking to people, having lines of communication, open all the time. It can be very different.
Is there a particular...
Except for one thing.
Go ahead, Tom.
I'll give you to the 4th of July before they're at each other's throats. They have different constituencies, different pressures, different people. Those people that got elected in the last election by the Obama coattails, the margins weren't that big. So they're going to start looking toward their districts and see what brought me here. If I want to stay here longer than a year or two, I better start paying attention to folks back home. And they're going to start hearing some pressures from home. It is not going to be as easy as it appears as we sit here today. The first 100 days will come along. In the first place, the 100 days reduces down to 50 because of vacations and recesses. There'll be report cards. And oh my gosh, how'd he do? How didn't he do? But I think Howard and Nick are both right to a point until you start realizing those guys are going to figure out up on the Hill what brung me to this party, and I better be careful.
Absolutely.
But that presumes, Tom, that somehow or other not working with the president is what they need to do to satisfy their constituents. If the president maintains his popularity in the countryside, then the way for them to protect their political selves is to work with him. You're assuming he's lost popularity and therefore they have to go watch out for their constituents at his expense. If he is able to sustain the momentum he has, then the political imperative is to go with him. And it may play out the way you're saying, but you know, just because that's somewhat recent experience, I don't think we should assume we're going to play that way this right now. You know, that's why I refer to 33 and 65, when there was sustained major legislation over a whole Congress. We'll see. We'll see. I'm hopeful that things will be better than that. We'll see.
Nick, let's say that Tom is right, and by the end of February, there is not a passed piece of legislation, right, on the stimulus bill. What would be your recommendation to then President Obama? How do I get this Congress to move? What would you ask him or tell him or suggest to him that he do?
That's a difficult question to answer in the sense that that would depend largely on the facts on the table at the time. What was it that was holding up the bill? You know, were Republicans saying and some group of Democrats that there was too much spending or too much embedded ongoing spending after the crisis had passed, such that you'd never get rid of the costs again? Was it that the tax cuts weren't of the right nature? So it's hard. I think you just have to. They're professionals. I think they'll be able to figure it out on their own. I don't think they'll need the advice. They're going to know the sticking points, and what you have to do to get over it then is find a way to unstick the glue. That's not a very good answer, but it's basically dependent upon what is there and figuring out what you need to do to get to 218 and to 51, assuming that it'll be 51 and not 60, or either way. It's just a matter of counting the votes.
Can I enter there because you suggest something to me that I don't understand, certainly most of the people, and that is how you do that. That is, we've had a very interesting conversation up to this point, but the point is, you run a shop in the White House. How often do you see the president? What do you tell him? How do you meet with him? Who works for you? How do you divide the people up? Do you cut them some half, go to the House, some to the Senate? How do they report? Where do you spend your days? Give us some sense of what it really is like to be the Director of Legislative Affairs for the President of the United States.
And the part, Tom, when you were in charge of this operation, that takes us back further than with the other two gentlemen. How many people did you have working with you?
One person in the Senate and 3 in the House.
So you had 4 people overall?
5 total.
5 overall.
That's right.
Nick, when you were there?
The second time I was there, I had 3 deputies, as Howard did. 1, the inside deputy, the traffic cop for all the paperwork and the meetings in the cabinet, and then a House deputy and a Senate deputy, and we ended up this time with 4 special assistants working for the House deputy, or 5 working for the House deputy, and 4 working for the Senate deputy.
So where are we up to, about 12, 13 now?
Yeah.
Howard?
Well, we were before this last one, so we were a little bit smaller than that. We had the 3 deputies, as Nick said, and we had, in addition, 3 special assistants on the House and the Senate. So 3, 6, 9, 10, including myself.
So in other words...
Plus some staff assistants, but in terms of lobbyists, it was 10 total.
So the operation itself, almost by definition, has doubled, tripled in size.
Except
but
don't forget something. The departments all work for you theoretically. Legislative affairs people in HHS, defense, state, everywhere, all work for the cause. So you can draw on them. There's no reason for the White House congressional relations person to go worry about the budget for the Small Business Administration, that you're called in at the White House when they get in trouble or when there's some big cosmic issue where the president has expended capital. And the president expends capital on vetoes, treaties, stimulus, those kinds of things. That's when the White House goes in and you draw on all of the departments. The agriculture congressional relations person may have a relationship with the chairman of the Ag Committee, and you're talking about an auto bailout bill. Well, he's got to help the president with his cause.
Okay, in that case, how does your day function, to get to Steve Hess's question, really? Do you start the day with the president every day?
No.
How did it work with you, Nick?
Senior staff. I mean, I think it's traditional in White Houses for as long as I've been either doing it or reading about it, that there is a senior staff meeting in the morning with the White House Chief of Staff and some reasonable number of the most senior people.
So what is your access to the president himself?
When I worked for Bill Clinton, he was readily accessible. I mean, the deal we had included walk-in privileges. So
Walking meaning?
You'd be able to go to the Oval Office whenever I needed to. He was totally accessible. He was engaged with the Congress. He was actually wonderful to work for in that respect.
Mm-hmm. In that respect?
Well, I think
a lot of people had walk-in privileges.
I think a lot of people wonder.
Whoa.
I think a lot of people who work in the White House, there are probably as many as 15 people with the senior title, which is assistant to the president. Doesn't sound fancy, but that's the title you aspire to. And the question is, how many of them deal directly with him? How many go through the chief of staff for their work? Is always an issue. In my experience, and also in what I know about recent other administrations, the presidents have been pretty willing to deal with the congressional relations people directly and to respond to them. But in answer to your question and Steve's, you've got 535 constituents on Capitol Hill, and you need to represent them, as Steve suggested in the introduction, to the administration, not just to the president, but to the administration. They come to you or to your people with every complaint, ache, White House tour, constituent issue that you can imagine. And you somehow really need to be responsive to them because you're never sure which one could be in a key spot to help on an important vote. So all the time you're representing the president to the Hill, you're becoming a caseworker for all these 535 members of Congress to the administration. And so this is very much a two-way street. Pennsylvania Avenue is one of the few streets in this city that still goes both ways. Okay, a lot of one-way streets, that's two ways. And you need to remember that, not ever lose sight of it if you're going to do this job correctly. You need to spend some of your day on the Hill. You need to be talking to key individuals. Now, they may be the leadership, they may be a key committee chair, but it could be the head of one of the caucuses. It could be somebody who's particularly close to the president, maybe somebody who's carrying an important piece of legislation. But you need to be on the Hill part of the day. People need to know that you're not hiding in the White House. And if you stay in your office too much of the time, it works against you. On the other hand, here's the tension. If you're not in the White House, you may not be in certain meetings that you really want to be in to have a voice about, no, you can't do that because Congressman Smith or Senator Jones is too important and you shouldn't be doing it. So you're constantly tugged and pulled. And that's why you need a staff.
Nick, is it then a function of the squeaky wheel, the wheel that makes a lot of noise is the senator or the congressman or the caucus that's going to get your attention?
No, not necessarily. There are some who are better than that, or better at that than others, and you can hardly afford to ignore them because, as Howard said, you never know when you're going to be looking for the vote. So you spend time with them, but you try to make it so there aren't squeaky wheels, and you deal with the people. You deal with whatever the issue du jour is. the committee chairman, the leadership. I mean, everybody had fairly, not carefully defined roles by any stretch, but, you know, I would spend part of my day with the House leadership, part of the day with the Senate leadership, part of the day at the White House, but going back and forth all the time, a lot of phone work. Meanwhile, my deputies, one planted again inside the White House, and the other spending almost full time up on the House side or the Senate side, and you have your people up there all the time. Basically, they live up there. They look like the statues in the hall. Members walk down the hall, they see these people, the staff see them. They're always familiar faces. It's kind of a joke. You leave the White House and you go back and people come up to you and start complaining about something and ask for your help because they assume that you're still there. You become natural. That's how you keep your finger on the pulse, gather the intelligence so you can do what Howard references, a two-way. You know, it was Bryce Harlow's famous phrase, an ambulatory bridge across a constitutional gulf is how he described the Legislative Affairs Office. You spend part of your day at the White House with them telling you, you go tell, people say, you go tell them, and then you go up and people just say, you go tell them, you go tell him, and your job is to just kind of inch people together a little bit so that you can find the common ground to, again, get to 218 or 51 or 60.
Tom, what is the toughest part of the job?
Time.
Time.
Nick just described a third of the time on the Hill, a third of the time in the Senate, a third of the time in the House, a third of the time at the White House, and pretty soon it's 10 o'clock at night. Time and priorities, plus the pressures of, as Howard said, half your job is spent explaining the White House to the Congress, and the other half explaining the Congress to the White House. That's why it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out with so many Hill people in the administration so far. And not only from staff, from the Vice President, from the cabinet that has been chosen. The problem that you face is the separation of power issue. Too many times, when you cross that line along about 8th or 9th Street on the way to the White House to take that job, you have crossed the line. You are now them, and we are us. So the bridge that Nick and Bryce Harlow talk about has to be an open without a toll in it, so you can at least explain, get your points across, points of view across. The worst thing you can do is you sit there and you get 25, 30 phone calls after lunch. How do you answer them? If you ignore them, it's, oh my God, the White House has forgotten us. They haven't called Dianne Feinstein with the name of the new CIA director. Things are going to fall in cracks. So time and priority is the biggest problem that you face.
But last question, you're down to that last vote that you need. What do you do? How do you get it?
You don't want to know.
I do.
The answer is you do business. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is, the classic in the Clinton administration would have been the passage of the economic plan in 1993. There were no Republican votes in the House, in the Senate, at any juncture for the economic plan. They told President Clinton the second day in office that if there are revenue in the bill, you will not get a vote. Well, that meant if there's a single tax increase, we're not going to help you. This was a reaction to Bush 41 departing from his no tax pledge and the consequences of it. And the Republican Party reacted intensely to that in '93. It meant that we had to pass the economic plan with Democratic votes only, which made every member of the Democratic caucus in the House and the Senate independent businessman negotiating terms. And we negotiated terms on a retail basis with a lot of them, very frankly. They had issues in their districts or their states. They had people they wanted to have appointed to certain jobs. And you do horse trading. You know, anybody who pretends that you don't do horse trading with the Congress is not being truthful with you.
And the
Except
horse trading,
except maybe Nick never did it.
No, it's you, Howard. You're the one who does the horse trading.
Yeah, you do it. You may use others. Tom spoke about having members of the cabinet help so that if you find out in Tom's example that the Secretary of Agriculture is, I mean, the chairman of the Agriculture Committee is uncertain vote on some other issue, the person who may be most able to talk to him for the White House turns out to be the Secretary of Agriculture.
Right.
So, but you're directing. Now, you're either doing it yourself or you're managing it. and you're ticking it off. But we had a policy, which I assume Tom and Nick did as well, that on really, really difficult votes, we needed a minimum of 2 independent confirmations of the vote before we'd call the roll.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you can't rely on a member of Congress telling one person, okay, or I'm with you, on a very crucial vote. On the really crucial votes, things like passing the Clinton economic plan by 1 vote, you need 2 independent commitments from any...
Independent meaning what? Out of the Congress?
No, separately, we need the member of Congress to have an independent conversation with 2 different people from the administration confirming that that vote is secure. And you keep track of where it's coming from.
Another way, if 51 senators say, I'm with you if needed, you got a problem.
It's a big problem.
Nick, what about the problem posed by the new media? When Tom was doing this job, he wasn't disturbed by a 24-hour cycle, by the internet, by all of these various gadgets that are used today. And there are many different ways in which reporters function, and everything has to be out there as quickly as possible. Does that affect the way in which you do your job?
Yes.
How?
In all sorts of ways. I think it's been one of the most significant developments over time, and probably, no, not probably, definitely not a positive one. It exacerbates or accentuates all the diversity and all the problems and differences that people have, because it's better to throw red meat than it is to talk about gray nuances on issues. And it highlights the differences between people. I think it's changed the way members of Congress operate. I think it's changed the way that they deal with each other. There was a time, and you know, we're all old enough to remember this, where members of Congress would argue with each other all day long. And they would go out drinking or having dinner together at night and talk to each other. And there would be greater dialogue and greater communication amongst themselves on really difficult issues. I've seen that, in my personal view, dissipate over time. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the media glare. You know, you can't be a halfwayer anymore.
You know, a lot of people would argue just the reverse, that all of this new technology and the new way, the new media, so to speak, has opened the world. It has made people more accessible, the system more accessible. The President-elect speaks about transparency, and I'm sure that that is going to make your life, what, infinitely more difficult, Tom?
Absolutely. An argument can be made from an old conservative fuss budget like me that you can get a lot more done in an executive session in a meeting where you don't have to showboat to the cameras and to what happens, because you can say, let the record show that I oppose this vigorously, now let's vote on it. You can't do that. You can't do that anymore in all the openness and the transparency that we have. That, and Nick's right. It is not to the better government.
Howard, not to the better government.
There's a natural tension between an increased democratization, small d, and the relationships which drive and lubricate the legislative process. And it's probably a healthy tension, but I think Nick and Tom are right. I think that it's much more difficult for people to work things out with this kind of transparency that you see now, because people are then seen to be compromising on the ideology or not hewing to the party line. And the fact of the matter is that the legislative process is, first of all, incremental. It's a compromise, always a compromise. I mean, that you can't pass any legislation without somebody giving away something. It doesn't happen the other way. And so putting that in stark relief for the public, I think, makes it somewhat more difficult. I think cable news is difficult. If you go back to the beginnings of the Clinton administration, just 16 years ago this week, there was the Zoe Baird nomination, which failed in the first days of the administration to be Attorney General, as you recall, Marvin. What did that in was radio talk. Oh, how antiquated is that? Okay? Here we are, the technology has gone 6 generations since then to instantaneous communications.
But what happens then with our capacity? I mean, we've talked about, there are a couple of large themes that have come up in the last 40 minutes or so. And transformational, the importance of the moment. Everybody wants something to happen. And you seem to be describing a system that technologically is getting itself into a new kind of gridlock, which is not the old gridlock that you were talking about before, which is political. This has to do with journalism, and this has to do with reporters who are trying to get information for the public, the people who elect you into office. So what are you all describing? I find this rather terrifying.
I don't think it's terrifying at all. It's just the process.
Makes me feel better.
I wasn't being critical of you, Marvin. No, look, it's the process. It is what it is. I tell people all the time, you know, when they talk about gridlock with Congress, what we talked about earlier, it's built into the system. It's the way it's supposed to be. It's not pretty. It's not easy. It's not smooth. And I still think we do better at it than anybody else in the world. And everybody's got their different agenda. Everybody's got their different role to play. The media certainly has it, and it doesn't mean that it's. I'm approaching it on a clinical basis. Does it make it more difficult to get the job done, which was the original question? I think the answer is definitely yes. Does it accentuate some of the ugliness that can be in the system? I think the answer is yes. And I think part of that is journalism, and I think you'd probably agree, I can't speak for you, but has changed somewhat. You know,
profoundly,
you know,
not somewhat,
it's the gotcha, and you know, if you're involved in an issue or you're watching or you know anything about it and you watch some of the reporting, there's no nuance. Sometimes it's just totally wrong, and it's remarkable that it gets on the air.
Can this, what you're describing, can it block a piece of legislation as significant as the economic stimulus plan?
I doubt it can block it, but it can make it more difficult. You know, if you pick up some issue somewhere, and I can't think of an example, maybe Howard or Tom can, of a piece of legislation where talk radio got on it, or, you know, one side or the other on cable news got on it, and it picks up this fire, and then the bloggers start to go.
Immigration.
Let me ask another question, because we now know that technology has changed. A lot of things have changed the way we've had to do business. You have to adjust to that. What about the people? What about, you've seen a lot of members of Congress for a very long time. Have they changed? Are the same people being elected? Are they staying in office in the same way? Do they care about the same things? What's changed with the system that you're having to deal with?
Obviously, younger members are more comfortable with technology in general than older members. There are exceptions for sure, but in general that's the case. But it's about the institution, not about the people. The Congress is a permanent institution. It's ongoing. Presidents come and go. I remember vividly a conversation.
And members come and go too?
Well,
really
they come and go a lot slower than presidents. I remember the first time I brought then Appropriations Chairman William Natcher to meet Bill Clinton. They'd never met before. He was chairman of the Appropriations Committee. And they got on well. It was a very important meeting. And Chairman Natcher turned to him and said, "You're my 9th president. I'm going to help you." and I remember the moment vividly. And there are a bunch of folks up there that could say to President Obama, not you're my 9th or even 10th or 11th president now. And so the institution is ongoing. The technology may change. There was a time when televising Senate and House proceedings was absolutely impossible.
Sure.
I remember when Robert C. Byrd railed against it. Russell Long was going to, you know, it was going to destroy the ability to have good debate. People would perform to the cameras. Oh, here we are on C-SPAN today, and we know, guess what, it works. Okay, the system works. So I think we can overstate technology, okay, as an impact. We have in congressional relations a system which the Founding Fathers brilliantly put together, which labors well along to these days. It is a separation of powers. It is a juxtaposed set of relationships. It requires personal dealings back and forth. There will be raised voices at times, and there will be camaraderie at times. And we'll just adapt to what the technology gives us, but it doesn't change what's going on in town if one has a proper perspective.
Yeah, but I wasn't just thinking about technology. What about money? What does it cost to get elected? How do you raise the money? How much time does a member of Congress have to spend raising money as opposed to when you started, Tom? What does it mean that they have to raise all that money now? So there are other things that I'm asking if they affect what you see in Congress as you know it more intimately than any other 3 people we could find.
Unfortunately, money has become such a big factor The minute someone is elected, he's already trying to raise money for his next election. Many times the sole purpose of which is to have $2 or $3 million in the bank so that the opposition can say, oh, I can't run against him. To Nick's point, too, the technology and the charisma that a person has and his television time that he has to buy for his campaign, they're constantly running for office, and it has not made the system any better for the dinners and the families getting together at night. They're running home to go to the latest fundraiser. The money has not been a positive feature of all this. I don't know the second answer. I'm certainly not for public financing, and nor am I for ceilings on how much someone can spend. If 5 of us want to buy a billboard that says vote for Howard, that's fine. That's our prerogative. But on the other hand, it is so far out of control and how they're spending money. There are people having fundraisers starting next week. Next week, it's not even in session yet.
Amazing. I want to say that we've got about 30 minutes to go, and if any of you has a question, please come to the microphone right in front, and I will recognize you at that point. The question that I had is, you have all worked for a president or even a couple of presidents. Does Obama resemble anybody that you have ever worked with?
So far, he resembles Reagan.
In what way?
By running up to the Hill, by talking to him. I remember Reagan and Tip O'Neill, when I first took them up to meet each other. A couple old Irishmen put their arms around each other, and never mind during the day, they're yelling at each other over some policy thing. At night, they're drinking a highball, talking about telling each other old Irish stories. I think Obama, being a Senate person, and he's going to have a lot of help from Biden, and he's going to have a lot of help from Rahm Emanuel. I think so far, he's got him eaten out of his hand. And President Reagan, during the transition, I remember well, had him eaten out of his hand, going around smiling at everybody. On the other hand, comparing him to Nixon, Timmons will tell you, our old leader in congressional affairs, we had a hell of a time getting Nixon to even talk to the Congress.
Really?
Oh, man, it was tough. We had a
What was his attitude?
Oh, there's those SOBs on the Hill. And we had to drag him screaming into leadership meetings to tell him that the Vietnam War was over. It was tough, and yeah, he knew he had to do it, and I'm not sure about what I'm about to say again. It cost him. His relationships were not good. President Bush, the current President Bush, the whole White House apparatus took an anti-Congress attitude. Never mind, they're at each other's throats early on over whatever issues you want to talk about. But Obama, he has the makings of a personal congressional relations person.
We go to the, you could identify yourself and give us your question.
I'm Chris Arterton from GW, and I wanted to know, you've spoken about sometimes when there's tensions between two aspects of the job. When there are overlaps in uncertainties about committee jurisdiction, to what extent can the White House intervene effectively and play a role in decisions about which committee is going to take the lead on a particular piece of legislation?
Not on my watch.
Not on my watch either.
Oh, sir.
Very carefully. That's like the White House getting involved in a leadership race.
That's the third rail.
It's a prescription for disaster.
One of the interesting things that we didn't talk about, and it comes off of this question a little bit, is how the Congress has changed. We haven't talked about that very much.
Yeah.
We have, at this moment, as strong a speaker as any of us have seen in our lifetime. Speaker Pelosi has consolidated power in a remarkable manner. And one thing she's going to resist is the White House disintermediating her by dealing directly with the members of Congress. Now, they will, and the members of Congress will demand it. But her message is she wants stuff to come through her. And the last thing one wants to do is get themselves, from the White House perspective, caught up in internal congressional battles. That's not my job. I don't get involved with that. The institutional prerogatives are such that it would be out of order. very frankly, to do that. Particularly with the kind of strong speaker we have. There's really, I don't think, we go back amongst us to Tom's work with President Nixon, and there's been no time. I mean, you got to go back, maybe even into Joe Cannon to get this kind of powerful speaker. She is in charge of the House, and make no mistake about it.
Is that a function of her personality, the idea that she comes from San Francisco? Does that give her any special clout?
I think she comes from Baltimore. It gives her special
clout.
She
comes from Baltimore.
She has some good big city politics.
Yes, ma'am, please.
I'm Beverly, whoops. Shorts and I have broken the microphone. I'm Beverly Thompson. I'm from the Uniformed Services University in Bethesda. And my question has to do with the issue of raising money. I was actually approached last week by phone to contribute to the 2010 Congressional Committee for my party. And one of the reasons they said was because the other party was already doing it. So I was just shocked. I'm still barely getting over the election as it is. But how does the fact that members are running essentially all the time now changed, or how does that affect your ability at the White House to interact with Congress? I would imagine in the past, the second year was when people started running, but now, as you say, they are running all the time.
Sort of a permanent campaign, right?
I think that's correct. It is a permanent campaign, and it used to be there was a time when you would wait at least until the fall, so you were a year out to start fundraising. That kind of break doesn't occur anymore, and particularly the committees, and this again gets back to technology in some ways. They've got you pinpointed, and they've got your name on a list, and then the list gets sold, so you constantly get calls at home, and you can blame it on whatever you want, but everybody just wants the money. They want to get it early, and that's not only between the parties, that's intra-party, between the Democratic National Committee, the Senatorial Committee, and the Congressional Committee. It works that way. So
part of this money problem, though, is a result of reform, and it's useful to remember that. There are two big reforms we've gone through in the last 30 years that have got us where we're here. One is the internal congressional reforms which provide that people can't chair more than one committee or more than one committee and one subcommittee. So now we have 250 members of the House, and probably 125 of them chair a committee or a subcommittee. It creates a power base from which to raise money from interest groups that didn't exist when somebody could chair 2 or 3 different subcommittees. There were just fewer chairmen, fewer people with that authority. So this breaking up of power in the House has given more people the ability to raise money. The second issue is we have taken away the ability of a small number of people to raise money for individuals. If you recall, and I bet everybody in this panel has read Robert Caro's history of Lyndon Johnson, how Lyndon Johnson, when he ran the Congressional Committee in the House, was raising money and channeling it to people in a way you can't do anymore, okay? And amassed his power that way and used it to ultimately to move to the Senate and to the White House. The ability of a president to direct money, frankly, it's limited from what it used to be. It used to be a lot easier.
But supposing you turn to those 10 million people who were hooked into the Obama internet campaign.
And it may be that he can do some of that. It will be interesting to see the extent to which he's willing to do that when he figures how much he's going to need to get reelected in 4 years. But he may be able to do some of that if he wants. The DNC, if he gives his list to the DNC, which he doesn't have to do, by the way.
No, what I'm getting at is that Obama has already proven that you can raise money this way.
Yes. As
and
an individual.
Dean 4 years ago did the same thing. Didn't work for him.
But I guess the question is whether or not a small number of leaders or the president can raise money the way they did 40 or 50 years ago and ensure, Congressman Hess will fund the campaign, don't worry about it. And one could say that in those days. There weren't the limits on how much you could take from individuals. Cash was legal. And we reformed ourselves in this transparent new universe to a point where we really have made every member of Congress a sole entrepreneur in fundraising. And this is a reform we created, but then it leads to this perpetual fundraising that Nick talks about.
To Howard's point as well on this reform business, the other thing that's happened, I remember, showing my age, in my day, Wilbur Mills, Russell Long, and Nixon or Lyndon Johnson would get together, and those 3 guys could pass a tax bill. The power of the committee chairman has been diffused all over the place by the reforms, by transparency, by what have you. So now you have a you need really 51 and 200 and whatever it is, 218 in the House to pass things. The power of the leader, Sam Rayburn. If he wanted something, it'd pass. The same thing used to happen with Lyndon Johnson. You know, read the history books about how powerful he was in the Senate.
But Tom, Speaker Pelosi wanted an end to the Iraq War. Over the last 2-3 years, she's made that very clear. The 2 years that she's been Speaker. And yet she was not able to do that. So that the power, maybe this is proof of what you're all saying, that the power has been so diminished as a result of all of these factors, that even somebody who is the Speaker, and Howard, you were talking about the way she uses that power, but there are limitations that are obvious.
There are always going to be limitations. It's when you cross the threshold between the survival of your colleagues or not, what Tom spoke about at the beginning of our conversation. At the point at which somebody's worried about their own survival, they're not going to follow their president or their leader.
Okay. Let's get this gentleman. Question, please.
Good evening. Arthur Orkish with the Polish Embassy. My question pertains to the strong personalities that are placed in various cabinet posts and to the point of the strength of the Speaker as well. Recent developments like, for example, Senator Feinstein's objection to the appointment of the CIA director or some reservations about it. What is your impression with how all of these strong personalities are going to interact like with President-elect Obama, specifically Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, in light of open door policy, access, and formulating a foreign policy that is in line with a Democratic Congress? Thank you.
An hour of talking
Howard,
about stuff I know nothing about. Now I can answer a question I know something about. Senator Clinton is an ultimate team player. She takes things very seriously. And she will be not only loyal to the president, she will execute his policies. She may fight vigorously inside the administration about a policy issue she feels strongly about. But he can go to bed every night with absolute confidence. And when he makes a decision, she will press it as vigorously as she can. And she'll be a good advocate for him. I need to tell you that I was a Clinton person during this last primary session. And, my candidate didn't win, but she'll be a great Secretary of State, and she'll be loyal.
She was a good senator. She took care of New York. She's tough. The interesting thing to me is going to be you sit there with Gates, very powerful Secretary of Defense, Senator Clinton, very powerful Secretary of State. You sit there with Joe Biden, Vice President of the United States. And you sit there with Jim Jones. That's the toughest job in the White House. I feel sorry for the president. Who are these 4 people is he going to listen to that all have smarts in that arena of the international field? That's going to fall to the National Security Advisor to sift through all of these things and present a coherent policy to the president from which he can decide. Hopefully, they'll hammer it out among themselves. Bryce Harlow used to say, he said it to me when I went to the White House, young man, your job is to keep the trash of government from the president. So figure it out before, let the president think deep thoughts so he can get his job done.
Now, is that true for all presidents? Aren't some of them, like Jimmy Carter, for example, so desirous of even figuring out who plays tennis at a certain point on
Marvin,
the White House
presidents
tennis court?
bring into the job what they were before. Jimmy Carter was a nuclear physicist, nuclear submariner. What do nuclear physicists do? They got to touch everything. They got to figure out what's in this glass. Nixon was a lawyer. He liked legal paths to write down different things. Jerry Ford was a congressperson. What do Congress people do? You say 10, you say 7, let's decide on 8 and go home. Presidents, and Clinton was a policy monk. He was a governor. He liked to dig deep into spotted owls and bank legislation. So presidents bring into the job what they were before, which is going to be an interesting thing to see what Obama is.
Exactly. I was just wondering, what would be your sense of what he's going to do when he comes in?
Well, I think that's the remaining question about him, and I think right now he's managed it magnificently. He's got all these personalities. He's got them, it's early, It could change, but he's got them running in the right direction. I think over time we will find out what kind of manager he is. And just because you have strong personalities doesn't mean they can't work together. You know, in terms of cabinet members, inevitably, in every administration, there are one or two that are outliers, where you argue vigorously inside the White House, in the cabinet meetings or in the smaller meetings you have on policy issues. Everybody's right on the page, and they will be right back to the Hill. And there is a danger in this administration for that, because everybody has, not everybody, but so many of the cabinet members have an independent base on the Hill. And if I may take a digression here, because I want to get back to something that Howard said, because all of us are vested, Democrats or Republicans, in the Office of Legislative Affairs. The key, I think, to success for a president, in many cases, is his relations with Congress. That's obvious. But one of the keys to achieving that success is how the Office of Legislative Affairs is managed. And because every member of Congress will want to talk to the Vice President, the Chief of Staff, check off your list. And Howard's anecdote about Phil Shalero sitting up there with Larry Summers and the others speaks volumes, because the President needs to empower his head of legislative affairs, because then they can deal with the members. You don't want them going with the Chief of Staff all the time.
Right.
You want them to know that you speak for the President. We had, it was a rule or a custom, it was Andy Card's idea, and it was enforced. If the President got a call from a member of Congress, I would get a call from his office, and usually to find out what was going on. If Andy got a call, and if he took the call first, he would always say, "Have you talked to Nick?" It speaks volumes. And they knew that I could go up and negotiate, and that if I said it was good, it was good. And if I said it wasn't going to fly, it wasn't going to fly. So, there's a lot of strong players, a lot with Hill experience, but they've got a legislative affairs office that's going to have experience too, and they need to trust them and make them the buffer, because you don't want to be answering the questions in the first instance all the time.
Let me ask you a question, Nick, and all the rest. Don't you, in the White House, because I've been on a couple of White House staffs, as you know, don't you eventually become sort of the bad guys there? I mean, you're the people who are telling the rest of the staff they can't get that through Congress. It won't work that way. We've talked about your relations with a lot of things, members of Congress and so on. Give us more of a sense of your relation within the White House itself.
Well, that's an excellent question, an excellent point, and I see all three of us are kind of smiling, because it's true. You sit there in these meetings. Well, why don't we just do this? Everybody, first of all, as a given baseline, everybody who works in the White House, from the administrative assistants on up, is a legislative affairs expert. And left to their own devices, they will go to the Hill, and left to their own devices, members of Congress will forum shop. They'll go to the Chief of Staff, they'll go to the head of legislative affairs, and it is your job to say no, or to say what will fly and what won't fly. And there's many White Houses that have foundered on issues where they didn't trust the judgment of their legislative affairs people. In the case of Social Security in this White House, I would say candidly, I was gone already. But whenever the President pushed the issue with the Republican leadership, forgive the expression, there was a lot of crotch watching going on. Just sitting there like this. They wouldn't even acknowledge that he was talking about it for the most part. And after I left, the legislative affairs people kept saying, they're not going to buy, they're not going to buy. The President didn't take that opinion. He took someone else's opinion. The results were the start of his slide, really.
Let's try to get a few more questions in, please.
Sure. My name is Nick Trano from Georgetown University. Mr. Hess's book, he talks about how margins matter in Congress and the way the White House negotiates with Capitol Hill. But to what extent do you think the Obama administration needs to anticipate the margins in 2 or 3 congressional elections from now if they stand to lose seats if he's not on the ballot? And how does that play into the way that he does business with Congress?
What was the question?
To what extent do you have to anticipate the margins that may be coming down the road?
That may come down the road 2 or 3 elections ahead?
I mean, the history is that in the first by-election after a large gain, that the party in power will lose seats. That's the history. Guess what happened in 2002? You picked up. Okay? So the history, that was after 9/11. It may have been related a little bit to 9/11. I don't know. But
I think it was good legislative work on the Hill.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
No harm in me agreeing with you. I don't care. But Obama has to be sensitive to pushing his people in a manner which can cost seats in any significant number in 2010. And what will be reported on constantly is the loss of the Congress by the Democrats in the 1994 election, 2 years into the Clinton term. And that'll be the model against which Obama will be measured. You don't do things that repeat what happened to us back in 1994. And when Democrats on the Hill don't want to follow Obama, they'll say, oh no, we can't do that. Remember what happened in 94. And they'll hide behind that constantly. So it'll be a factor. It'll be an omnipresent factor in the back of their minds. And you know, it's one reason that I think taxes figure so prominently in the economic stimulus bill, to make sure that it is a bipartisan bill. You know, one of the lessons that we suffered in '93 was we passed a partisan economic package, and that was a good package, and it worked, and you know, stand by the substance of it, but it was a partisan vote. This will not be a partisan vote. There will be Republican votes for this package.
The other thing we haven't talked about for just a second, too, but to pick up what Nick and Howard are saying is brilliant congressional relations is give Congress everything it wants every day. No, I won't compromise. I won't go halfway. No, I want it all. The other thing, like Nick points out, every member of Congress wants at least a half hour with the president every week to present his views. Anything short of that, it's the congressional relations shop is a failure. That's just a slight exaggeration, and Howard and Nick will agree with me.
This is what I meant at the very beginning when I asked you, how does a president divide up his day? Because the pull from the Congress, there are so many people up there, and everybody's a great genius, and there's a king or a queen, it's so demanding. I mean, it would seem to me that the president is constantly saying, no, I don't have the time for it.
No, because it's, you know, it's what Tom referenced, you know, it's your job. I don't want to use the word trash, but, you know, we had a rule. It's a matter of, it's not whether you want to see the president, it's whether you actually need to see the president and he needs to see you. And that all has to be managed. It's a difficult process because you have human beings involved and you have egos involved. But it's a process that from the chief of staff and the head of legislative affairs have to be the chief managers of that process. It's the same thing with cabinet members, you know, because everybody wants to see the president. You know, you don't have to. I mean, you were talking about access before. I had access anytime I wanted it to this President Bush. It was a little different the first President Bush, I would say. But you don't abuse it, and you use it when you have to or when you think you need to. But you do the same thing where you manage other people, you know, because they're also...
But there are ways, Marvin, to do this efficiently. So you say to the chief of staff and the scheduler, we need to invite all the freshmen, Republicans and Democrats, down for breakfast. We'll put them in the east room of the state dining room one day. We'll put
bring in a group of them?
A big U-shaped table. Then you give the president a note, briefing him on the thing, and say, here are 3 people you need to grab on the shoulder when you have a chance. So, but you're inviting all the freshmen. You're not distinguishing among them, because that would be a real mistake. I mean, one of the rules of inviting people to the White House is there's always a rational group. It's not ad hoc. It's the Republican members of this committee or the Democratic members of that committee or the bipartisan group from here. But it's never, you know, let's invite Marvin and Tom in for a meeting because people will say, how come they got in? Okay? So it's always, there's a category. But you can get a lot done in a little time with a really good political president and use your time efficiently.
Let's get this question here, please.
Thanks
2 questions, okay.
Thanks for being here, gentlemen. It's been a really interesting conversation. My name is Kalita Bach. I work for a national nonprofit association, but today, obviously, I'm here as an individual citizen. President-elect Obama has said that anyone who has been a registered lobbyist in the past couple of years will not be eligible for a political appointee position in his administration. And I'm curious, over the administrations that you've worked with, the number of people who have worked in the White House Office of Congressional Affairs who were registered lobbyists, and what, if any, impact do you think that his statement will make on kind of the future of his administration?
Nick, I'm electing you.
I'm happy to do it because I was going to jump in. I disagree vehemently with the president-elect on this. I don't think that being a lobbyist should put a black mark on your soul and a indelible mark on your soul. You know, we all are part of a fraternity. We know people, we know how to get things done, we know the process. I think we do it in a very even-handed, in a very upper-handed way. What's the word I want?
Proper.
Yeah. What was that?
Proper's good.
Yes. No. it's part of the process, and I think that you can suffer from it. You don't want people in jobs who have no experience with that job. And that's a danger. And I think you take people for what it is. You know, I think that any one of us up here would talk about public service in a way that is meaningful. You know, you don't take it just to be at the White House. Hopefully you have some sense that public service is important and it gives you a chance to serve. And because someone has been in and out, for instance, I don't think that should be a disqualifier if you want highly qualified people who can help you get done what you want. Hopefully the rationale or the standard should be good person, highly professional, right instincts and right motives.
I want to agree with Nick, and to answer your question, I went from being a business lobbyist, I'd previously been a union lobbyist, into the White House lobbying job. And President Clinton was criticized for giving me the job. And I was asked about that, and I said, would it have been better for him to pick a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon to be his chief lobbyist? I mean, it's silliness. So I'm delighted President Obama has arrived in town. I think he's going to be a great president. I think he's wrong on this issue. And I think as I've watched Phil Scialero, who's really a good choice, 25-year Hill veteran and enormously well-respected by everybody, excellent choice. As I watch him assemble his team, I know it's a problem. And I know it was a problem for Mark Patterson, who's running the cabinet confirmation, putting together the several hundred people you need to handle all these confirmations at once. And so I think he's just plain wrong. And I don't think that being a lobbyist, which I was for many years, I am not now, but which I was for many years, I somehow don't think it was a bad thing to do.
Okay, and let's get the last question in, please.
My name is Dr. Einhorn. I'm a former fellow of Georgetown and George Washington. I also admire Obama, but I wonder how, you know, when Bush had a bad approval rate, Congress had half of that approval rate. The reason is they're somnolent, they are lethargic, they're absent. You just watch C-SPAN, and when there's a big problem going on, you see about 2 or 3 people sitting in an empty hall, and they're sleeping. Do you think that Obama, after having skimmed the best of the Congress people for his cabinets and left the residue, that he will ever be able to wake them up and maybe put some order? Because we realize that legislators, as you mentioned, they have now to go and campaign. I think there were 15 people for 2 years for the presidential campaign. While paid by taxpayers' money and getting salaries, they were out campaigning for themselves. And so are all the other people.
Okay.
Is he going to be able to change that?
Tom,
because
you
I'm
can
old,
tell us whether he can
because the
change
difference between an optimist and a pessimist is a pessimist is
Thank you
better
very much,
informed,
sir.
and I'm wondering.
Thank you.
Congress has been in for a long time. They're a younger, more eager crowd. I think I don't want to say the smarts, but I guess that's what I mean, has increased immensely. The term limits that some of them have put on themselves. You have a younger, eager, smarter, more educated Congress coming in. Yeah, they're sleeping members of Congress just like they're sleeping school teachers and sleeping cops and what have you around the world. You're never going to change that. But I think I think that's an exaggeration, your point about that. Somehow it gets done. Somehow it works.
No, it gets done, and there are a lot of wonderful people
That's right.
who are involved in public service. And Nick, you were making that point before. Most people would not go into it if they didn't feel that they were making a contribution to the
Absolutely.
country with the
Absolutely.
work that they do.
Let me ask one last
Go ahead,
question. Because we know, thanks to Franklin Roosevelt, that at 100 days, the Obama presidency, like all other presidents, is going to be measured. And on day 99, every presidential historian will be called up and asked, what do you think? How's he doing? Where does he have to be at 100 days? Give us some sense of the next year ahead, his first year in office. We know he starts with this great popularity. We know that there's much to be done. Give us your final judgment on.
How would you start us off?
Maybe a transformational president will break the rule that you have to be judged in 100 days. Maybe that would be the great breakthrough.
What, do it in 30?
The economic plan obviously has to be enacted, and people have to begin to see some of the fruits of that. That'll be the single largest test. He's going to have taken some clear position on what he intends to do in Iraq and provided some direction and have the support of the uniformed services for what he's doing in Iraq. Remember, he ran as an anti-war president, and there are a lot of people out there waiting to see what he intends to do about it. But he has to do it in a way that keeps the uniformed services support. I think those are in terms of a short-term result, those are the two biggest issues.
Nick?
I agree with Howard, and I think it would be great if we could get past the 100-day thing, because the people asking the question will expect him to have done the stimulus bill, the energy bill, the health care reform bill, and a few others just for good measure. And you know, you can't get anything done. You can get things done, but you can't make a significant mark really in 100 days except in really extraordinary circumstances. And these may be extraordinary circumstances, but it's a false measurement. If he's making steady progress and he's got people involved and he's got cooperation between the parties going on, I think he'll be a huge success.
Tom?
In the first place, 100 days is on May 1st. You take out weekends and recesses, you're down to 53 days. By then, there will be progress if he, hopefully, will have all of his people in place through the confirmation so that they can start working on some of these programs. Progress will be seen by how much we have done to push the problem along. None of these things. There are people complaining right now he's not even president. He hasn't done anything. So it's a false measurement, and one of the things that they've got to do is start knocking down this 100-day business, but it's an institutional issue that we have to cope with. Yeah, the stimulus package has to pass in some form. I still think it's going to take longer than we think. He's got to have some kind of an answer, and we haven't touched on it, on what he's going to be doing about the Middle East problem. That Gaza-Israel thing isn't going to end. So somehow or other, and mark my words, unfortunately, expect the unexpected. Somebody is going to test this president. Joe Biden was right. Putin's going to try something. The jihadists are going to try something. Somebody is going to test this president to see what he's made of. And I hope that we have the wherewithal in the administration and in the government to cope with that issue, unforeseen as it may be.
And among the American people.
And among the American people.
Because it'll all come together. It'll all come together. Our time is up, and speaking only for myself, I think this has been a terrifically insightful, rich, substantive discussion, and I thank the three of you very, very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
And I toss it to my colleague, Steve.
Well, I agree. I think we have all learned things we didn't know before, and boy, that does something for at a great university like this and throughout the C-SPAN network. I just should say, beyond thanking our fabulous trio here, the next session of this, the last session of our conversations with people who've been there will be on January 15th here at 4:30 to 6 again. This will be with speechwriters. We've had 3 congressional relations experts here. Then we will have 4 people who wrote speeches for the President of the United States, our last session before the President's inaugural address. So I hope you'll be with us for that, and my deepest thanks to my 3 friends here.